Chapter 1. Blood tasted like copper and old lies. I sat alone on my throne of black stone, feeling the burn of the silver poison in my veins, a fire that never went out. Because the silver poison ate at my bones, I had to keep my mask of stone tight. My advisor stood by the door, bowing low, his head tucked like a dog afraid of a kick. I waved him away. I needed silence, not his fake pity. Still, the silence was a monster of its own. It pressed against my chest, waiting for me to crack. What was the point of being a king if I was rotting from the inside? I let out a low, ragged breath. It sounded more like a growl than a man's sigh. Just like that, the shadows in the room seemed to stretch, reaching for me. In the quiet that followed, my hands shook. I gripped the armrests until my knuckles turned white. I could not show weakness. My strength was the only thing keeping the wolves of my own court from tearing my throat out. Next, a guard entered, his armor clanking in the heavy air. He held a scroll, his hands trembling. "My king," he muttered, "the report you asked for." I snatched it from him, my fingers brushing his skin. He flinched. I didn't blame him. Because I was a king who could not afford to bleed, I sent him away with a sharp glare. I was alone again. The room felt colder. I opened the scroll, my golden eyes scanning the words. It was about her, Maris Evernight. The name felt heavy on my tongue. She was once a lady, a wife to an alpha, but now she was nothing. She was rejected by her mate. She was cast out by her pack, and she was left to rot in the cold halls of Ethelgard. Was this really my salvation? I felt a sharp pinch of doubt. She looked so small on paper. As the wind shifted outside, the castle groaned. I looked up at the ceiling, watching the shadows dance. The forest held secrets, the forest held death, and the forest held my only salvation. I needed a catalyst. I needed someone whose blood was old and deep enough to fight the poison, someone who didn't care if they died. Truth be told, she was perfect. She had nothing left to lose. Before I could move, a spasm of pain doubled me over. My vision blurred. The silver was winning. If I didn't find the cure soon, the beast inside me would tear its way out and kill us all. I had to summon her. Tonight. Before the moon reached its peak, I would have my answer. The game was rigged, but I was the one holding the cards. Or so I hoped. Would she even survive the first night in my woods? Chapter 2. The Calculated Sacrifice. The ink on the page was dry, yet it burned with promise. I stared at the description of her life, my mind working like a trap. She was a woman of steel, or so the report said. She didn't cry when she was kicked out. She didn't beg for her dowry back. Instead, she stood tall and walked away. That was good. That was the kind of fire I needed. Because she was a discarded toy, the world thought she was broken. I knew better. In that moment, I realized she was just waiting for a match to set her soul ablaze. I stood up, ignoring the way my heart hammered against my ribs. I walked to the window, looking out over the dark, sprawling trees of the Whispering Blackwood. It was a place of ghosts, and it was going to be her new home. Meanwhile, my mind raced with dark thoughts. Did I feel guilt? Maybe a little. But guilt was a luxury for those who weren't dying. I needed power, I needed control, and I needed to survive. If I had to break her to fix myself, then so be it. She would be my pawn, and I would be her end. Or her beginning. It depended entirely on what she was made of. A scratch at the door broke my focus. It was my messenger waiting for orders. "Bring her," I commanded, my voice gravelly. "Tell her the king requires her presence." Without another word, he scurried off. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait. I felt a strange pulse in the air. The forest was waking up, sensing its new prey. What followed was a long, cold wait. I paced the floor, my wolf pacing inside me, eager for the hunt. It wanted to taste her fear. It wanted to see if she would break when the shadows started to whisper her name. I fought the urge to shift, to let the beast take over. If I shifted now, I might not be able to turn back. I had to stay human. I had to stay a king. Because my own pack would slaughter me if they knew how weak I truly was. I had to be perfect. No mistakes. No mercy. Just the hunt. I looked at the moon, hanging like a pale eye in the sky. It was watching me. It was judging me. Did I deserve to live? Or was I just another monster waiting for the sun to rise? Chapter 3. The hunt begins. The heavy doors groaned open, and there she stood. She was not the weak girl the reports described. She was covered in travel dust, her dress torn at the hem, but her head was high. She didn't tremble when she looked at me. Most women would be on their knees shaking with terror. She wasn't. Her eyes were sharp, bright with a quiet, dangerous light. It was as if she knew exactly what I was. A dying king, a desperate beast, a man on the edge of the abyss. The air thickened between us, charged with a static that made my skin crawl. She didn't bow. She just waited. That was when I knew. This wouldn't be a simple game of cat and mouse. As the silence stretched, I stepped down from the throne. Every movement was a struggle against the poison, but I didn't let it show. I walked until I was only a few inches from her. I could smell her. Scent of rain and ozone. It was intoxicating. "You have been summoned for a purpose, Maris," I said, my voice low. "The forest is hungry." She tilted her head, not a trace of fear in her gaze. "And you, King?" she asked, her voice steady. "Are you hungry too?" I let out a sharp, jagged laugh. That was the spark. I liked it. "Tonight," I whispered, stepping closer until her breath hitched, "you will run. You will run until the sun touches the trees. Do not let the beast catch you." Beneath the moonlight, I watched her resolve harden. She looked me in the eye and nodded. She wasn't begging for her life. She was accepting her fate, or maybe she was challenging it. I didn't know which, and that scared me. Because the forest demanded a blood sacrifice, I had to ensure she understood the stakes. "If you live," I promised, "you get your freedom. If you die, well, you won't care." She stepped back, turning toward the door that led to the woods. Before either could speak, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. It was time. I watched her go, my wolf howling in my chest, caught between a desire to kill her and a desperate, burning need to protect her. As she vanished into the darkness, I wondered, was she the cure, or was she just the next soul to be lost to the trees? Chapter 4. The Threshold of Fear. The heavy iron gates screeched like a dying animal as they swung open. Because the forest was waiting, the air smelled of damp earth and rot. I stood on the balcony, watching Maris step into the shadows. She looked like a ghost in the dim light. Without warning, she broke into a run. Her movements were fast, sure, and graceful. It was not the run of a victim, but the run of a survivor. Was she already planning her escape? I gripped the railing until the metal groaned under my hands. I was the king, the hunter, the master of this dark land. Yet I felt like a spectator in my own life. As the wind picked up, it carried her scent back to me. It was not the scent of terror I expected. Instead, it smelled like cold resolve. Moments later, the forest swallowed her whole. I felt my skin itch. My beast was clawing at the surface, desperate to hunt. Because I had to maintain my grip on reality, I squeezed my eyes shut. I forced my breathing to slow down. My heart thumped against my ribs, a war drum calling me to war. I had to let her get a head start. Or maybe I was just stalling. Truth be told, I was afraid of what I would find when I caught her. Would she be weeping on the forest floor? Or would she be waiting for me with a blade? In the silence that followed, I made my move. I descended the stairs, every muscle in my body coiled for the shift. Without another word, I stepped out into the night. The air hit me like a physical blow. The trees seemed to lean in, whispering secrets I did not want to hear. My vision sharpened. I could see the path she took, a faint disturbance in the moss. She was moving north toward the deeper woods. Why there? The north was where the ley lines were thinnest. Was she smarter than she looked? I felt a sudden, sharp prickle of excitement. My pulse quickened, and for the first time in years I felt alive. As the forest held its breath, I shifted, not into the full beast, but into the shadow of it. I moved on all fours, my senses exploding with light and sound. The game was truly on now, and I could not wait to see what happened when the prey realized it was no longer alone. Chapter 5. The Stalking Shadow. Deep down, I knew the truth. She wasn't running from me. She was running to something. I padded through the undergrowth, a silent blur of fur and muscle. I tracked her by the faint rhythm of her heartbeat. It was steady, calm, and maddeningly brave. Because she was a noble, she should have been helpless. But she moved like a predator herself, stepping lightly to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. I watched from the safety of the dark canopy as she paused to inspect a tree. She was tracing the carvings on the bark, the ones the Order used for their dark magic. She knew. How could she possibly know? As if pulled by a string, my curiosity drew me closer. I drifted near her, hiding in the brush. Her hair was messy, sticking to her face, and her eyes were darting everywhere. She looked like a cornered wolf. Yet, she didn't look like she wanted to die. She looked like she wanted to live. Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just her stubborn heart, but she started moving again. This time she wasn't just running. She was testing the forest. She was checking the wind. She was observing the patterns of the night. I crouched, my claws digging into the dirt, feeling a swell of respect. She was not the weak girl I thought I bought. She was a weapon waiting to be honed. In that moment, a twig snapped nearby, but not from her. My ears swiveled. There was something else out there. My wolf senses flared, warning me of a new, darker presence. It was cold. It was hungry. It was not one of my pack. As the shadows danced between us, I smelled it, the metallic tang of silver. The Order. They were here, and they weren't here for me. They were here for her. Everything changed. The game was no longer a game of control. It was a game of survival. Would I let them take her? Or would I finally stop being a king who hid on a throne and become the beast they feared? As the air thickened with the scent of death, I prepared to strike. Chapter 6. The beast unleashed without warning. A shadow detached itself from the trees. It was a shifting dark mass, a creature of pure void and malice. It lunged at her. I didn't think. I moved. My body surged forward, a blur of power. I slammed into the shadow, my claws tearing through the dark mist. It shrieked, a sound like grinding metal, and vanished into the night. Maris spun around, her eyes wide, a rock clutched in her hand. She stared at me, her chest heaving. She didn't know it was me. She thought I was just another monster, another beast coming to finish the job. She swung the rock, her movements desperate and wild. I dodged, my heart pounding in my throat. I couldn't tell her who I was. Because of that, I had to stay in the shadows. I growled low in my throat, a warning, not a threat. She froze. Her eyes locked onto mine. There was no fear in them anymore, just a burning, ancient recognition. As the tension broke, she lowered the rock. She looked at me, and for a second time stood still. She saw the gold in my eyes. She saw the flicker of the man beneath the fur. The wind carried my scent to her, and I saw her shoulders slump in relief. She knew it was me. She knew I was the one who had sent her into this nightmare. Yet she didn't run. She stood her ground, waiting to see what I would do next. That's why I felt the ache in my chest. I couldn't protect her without revealing my own secrets. If the Order found out I was helping her, they would tear the kingdom down to get to us. Still, I couldn't leave her to die. Not now. I circled her once, my fur brushing against her arm, a silent promise of safety. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched my snout. Her hand was soft, warm, and so very human. My wolf hummed in contentment, settling deep into my bones. As the moon hit its peak, I turned toward the deep woods, nodding for her to follow. We were in this together now. Whether we liked it or not, our fates were tangled, bound by blood and the dark, whispering trees. Where would the morning light find us? Would we be allies or would we be enemies? I only knew one thing. I would die before I let them touch her. Chapter 7. The Pulse of the Forest. The forest did not just grow, it breathed. Soon after we entered the heart of the Whispering Blackwood, the bioluminescent moss began to glow at her touch. It was a soft, pulsating blue light, a sign of ancient sleeping magic. Because the forest was alive, it recognized the spark inside her. I watched from the shadows as the vines parted, creating a path where there should have been thorns. It was impossible. Even so, I felt a strange warmth spread through my chest. Was she truly the key? Or was this another trick of the light? Moments later, she turned back to look for me. Her eyes searched the dark, not with fear, but with a strange, calm curiosity. That's why I kept my distance. I was a monster in the dark, and she was the light. How could we ever walk side by side? I felt the familiar weight of the beast pushing against my thoughts, wanting to be closer, wanting to be near her scent. But then, I forced myself to stay back. I had to lead her to the sanctuary, not to my own heart. I was the king, and she was the key. I was the hunter, and she was the hope. I was the shadow, and she was the flame. Because I needed to test her, I guided her toward the shifting river. It was a place of illusions, where the water showed you what you wanted to see most. I watched to see if she would be distracted by the false promises of the current. She stood at the edge, her reflection rippling in the dark water. Her hand hovered over the surface. Would she reach for the phantom of her past life? Would she choose the comfort of the lie? She looked at the water, took a long breath, and then she stepped away. She walked past the trap without a glance. My jaw tightened in surprise. This girl was not what she seemed. What followed was the realization that I was no longer just protecting a pawn. I was walking with an equal. I stepped out of the shadows, shifting back into my human skin. The transition painful and slow. My bones ached, and my skin felt raw. I needed to know why the forest had accepted her. I needed to know what she felt when she touched the trees. But before I could speak, the wind turned cold. The forest stopped humming. Something was wrong. The air tasted like iron and stale smoke. The order was close. Would she be ready for the danger that was coming? Chapter 8. The Price of Truth. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a storm. Still, I moved toward her, trying to ignore the way my body betrayed me. Because the poison was working its way through my blood, I stumbled, my hand catching the bark of a birch tree to keep from falling. She saw it. She saw the tremor in my fingers, the gray pallor of my skin, and the way I struggled to breathe. Her eyes softened, not with pity but with a sharp, piercing concern. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just moved to my side, her touch light as a feather on my arm. Despite that, I pulled away. Do not, I warned, my voice raspy. It is not safe. She ignored my protest. Her eyes locked on mine with a stubborn fire. You are dying, she whispered. Her voice was not a question but a cold, hard fact. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a subject. I saw a woman who possessed the power to save me, if she knew how to wield it. I sat on a mossy log, the exhaustion finally pulling at my legs. I told her the truth about the silver, about the kingdom, and about the curse. It was a burden I had carried alone for far too long. Between one breath and the next, I waited for her to run. I expected her to recoil from the monster she had agreed to serve. Instead, she sat down beside me. She didn't move away. She didn't scream. She simply asked, How do we break it? That's why I felt my heart skip a beat. I had searched for years, hunted every legend, and bribed every sage. Yet, I had never found the answer. I looked at her, my golden eyes searching hers. The forest holds the answer, I said. But we have to survive the night to find it. Because I was a king, I had been taught to rely on no one. I was a wolf who ran alone. I was a man who hid his pain. But tonight, in the quiet of the woods, I felt a shift. She was the one who was now leading me. She gathered herbs from the forest floor, crushed them in her palms, and pressed them to my skin. The burn of the silver started to fade, replaced by a cool, numbing relief. It was magic, wild, raw, and untamed. She looked at me, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was the first time I had seen her truly smile, and it was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. What would happen when we reached the end of the line? Chapter 9. The Shadows Strike. As the sky darkened, the forest began to turn against us. Without warning, the trees started to move, shifting into unnatural shapes to block our path. The ground shook, throwing us off balance. It was the Order. They were using the forest's own roots to trap us. I stood, my instincts screaming for a fight, and pulled her behind me. My wolf wanted to burst out, to tear, to rip, to kill, but I had to remain human. I had to think. Because I was the king, I had to find a way to break the spell. Meanwhile, the scouts of the Order emerged from the thicket, their silver-tipped blades shimmering in the gloom. They weren't just men. They were hunters, trained to kill beasts like me. They looked at her with hungry, hateful eyes. They wanted her blood, not my throne. I stepped forward, my hands forming into fists. I could feel the magic of the forest trying to hold me back. "Get behind the tree," I shouted. She didn't listen. Instead, she grabbed a branch, her knuckles white, her stance wide and ready. She was going to fight. In that moment, the first hunter lunged. I caught his wrist, the silver burning my skin, but I didn't let go. I drove my other hand into his chest, throwing him back against a stone. It wasn't enough. There were too many. I felt the bite of a blade against my shoulder, a sharp, stinging pain that made me roar. My wolf was rising, breaking through the human veneer. My eyes turned gold, then red. I was losing the battle for control. Would I kill them all, even if it meant losing my humanity forever? As the battle raged, I saw a blade fly toward her. I didn't think. I lunged, taking the blow in my side, the silver searing my flesh. I howled in pain, the sound echoing through the trees. That sound, it was the signal for the forest to wake up. Vines shot up from the earth, grabbing the hunters, pulling them into the dark. We were alive, but we were bleeding. I sank to my knees, the forest closing in around us. She was standing over me, her hand pressed against my side, trying to stop the flow of blood. Her face was twisted with fear, not for her life, but for mine. She was the only thing standing between me and the end. I looked up at the stars above the canopy, the light fading from my vision, and wondered if this was where our story finally came to a screaming, bloody halt. Chapter 10. The Scent of Betrayal. The pain was a living thing. It crawled through my veins like ice, stinging with every shallow breath I took. Maris was there, her hands stained with my blood, pressing a bundle of crushed herbs against the jagged wound in my side. I wanted to tell her to stop, to save herself, but the words died in my throat. Because the silver blade had been laced with a dampening agent, my body refused to heal. I felt small, weak, and utterly at the mercy of the woman I had once viewed as a mere pawn. Was this my punishment? Was this how the king of the beasts finally met his end? As the silence stretched, the wind shifted. A sharp, chemical smell cut through the scent of pine and wet earth. It was the scent of the Order. They were tracking us, using a magical beacon buried somewhere in my own gear. Despite that, I stood up, leaning heavily on Maris. I had to keep moving. or they would corner us like trapped animals. She didn't argue. She simply took my weight, her shoulder pressing into my side, and guided me deeper into the thicket. She was the hunter. She was the healer. She was the hope. How could I have ever thought she was weak? Before long, we stumbled into a clearing where the trees grew in a perfect circle. The air here was different, static, charged, and heavy with power. I felt my wolf whimper in the back of my mind. We were standing on holy ground, a place forbidden to all but the ancient keepers of the forest. Because the beacon was pulsing in my bag, the order would be here within minutes. We had to hide, we had to heal, and we had to think of a way to fight back. Would the forest accept us, or would it reject the monster in my blood? Chapter 11. The Ancient Grove. The ground beneath us hummed. I collapsed onto the moss, my strength fading as the poison spread toward my heart. Maris knelt beside me, but she wasn't looking at my wounds anymore. She was looking at the stones in the center of the grove. They were glowing, casting a pale, rhythmic light that matched the beat of her own heart. In that moment, the world seemed to tilt. The truth hit me harder than any blade. The poison inside me wasn't just to kill me. It was a lock. It was designed to keep the forest's ancient magic from recognizing its true queen. Because I had been the guardian of this land for so long, I had been the unwitting jailer of her power. The Order hadn't wanted me to produce an heir with her. They wanted me to keep her suppressed so they could siphon her blood for their own immortality. I saw the fear in her eyes. I saw the fire in her soul. I saw the truth of my own mistakes. I had been a pawn, just like her. A king who thought he was playing the game, while all along, the board was being tilted to destroy us both. As if pulled by a string, Maris reached out to touch the central stone. The forest roared. Leaves swirled, branches groaned, and the air grew thick with the smell of ozone. She wasn't just touching the stone. She was feeding it. The blue light flared, blindingly bright, and rushed into my veins. It burned away the silver, cauterized the wound, and silenced the beast inside me. I gasped, the sudden influx of raw, untamed life force nearly tearing me apart. She was the source. She was the forest. And I was finally, truly, waking up. Chapter 12. The Shifted Tide. With a single glance, Maris collapsed back into my arms. The light dimmed, leaving us in the cool, blue shadow of the grove. I held her close, my breath catching in my throat as I realized what she had done. She had saved me, but she had revealed herself to the world. The Order would know now. They would come with everything they had. My heart pounded against her back. I was no longer just a dying king. I was a man with something to fight for. That's why the fear didn't cripple me. It fueled me. I looked at her, her face pale but her eyes shining with a new, dangerous strength. The forest stood tall. The wind carried whispers. The world felt like it was ending. We couldn't go back to the castle, and we couldn't run from our fate. We had to embrace it. I pulled her chin up, forcing her to look at me. "They are coming," I whispered. Her lips curled into a smile that was both terrified and bold. "Let them come," she replied. In the quiet that followed, I felt the beast shift. It wasn't the angry wild animal from before. It was calm. It was waiting. I was ready to lead. I stood up, helping her to her feet, and felt the power of the forest pulsing through the soles of my boots. We had one chance to end this. We had to turn the hunter into the prey. As we walked out of the grove, I wondered, what would happen when the king of the beasts and the queen of the forest finally met the men who dared to steal their lives? Chapter 13. The Weight of a Crown. The forest wasn't just a place anymore, it was a weapon. I stood in the center of the ancient grove, watching Maris. She was glowing, a faint golden light humming under her skin. Because the silver poison was gone, my mind felt sharp, clear, and terrifyingly alive. The beast inside me was quiet, satisfied, and waiting. It no longer fought me for control. Instead, it leaned into the connection I felt with her. We were a storm waiting to break. Truth be told, I had spent my entire life running from who I was, but standing here, I finally felt like a king. With every heartbeat, the trees around us seemed to grow taller, their leaves rustling in a language I was just beginning to understand. I walked toward Maris, my boots silent on the damp moss. She didn't look away. In that moment, the air between us became thick with tension. I reached out, my fingers grazing her cheek. Her skin was warm, vibrant, and so incredibly human. I felt the pulse of the forest beneath her skin, a river of life that belonged to her. Because she had saved me, I felt a debt I could never repay. I wasn't just her king, and she wasn't just a pawn. We were partners. The Order had tried to destroy us, but they had only made us stronger. I leaned down, my forehead resting against hers. I could smell the ozone and rain on her hair. "They are coming," I whispered. She pulled back, a defiant smile on her lips. "Let them," she replied. Her courage wasn't a choice, it was part of her soul. After that, the forest seemed to react to her confidence. A blanket of thick, silver mist rolled into the grove, obscuring the path we had taken. It was a shroud, a wall of protection that kept our location hidden. I realized that she wasn't just using the forest, she was becoming it. I was the iron of the sword, and she was the fire that forged it. We were not just surviving, we were evolving. That's why I finally let go of the fear that had defined my rule. I grabbed my sword, the steel singing in the quiet. We were ready. As the wind shifted, it carried the scent of iron, the smell of the Order's blades. They were close. I felt the forest tighten around us, an army of roots and branches ready to answer our call. I looked at Maris, and I saw a woman who would not break, a woman who would not bow, and a woman who would not die. I took her hand. It felt like holding the power of the sun. The time for hiding was over. The time for the hunt had begun. Chapter 14. The Forest's Fury. Without warning, the trees erupted. I saw the flash of silver blades before I heard the soldiers scream. They were everywhere, crawling out of the shadows like rats, their armor gleaming with false light. Because the forest was protecting us, the roots moved like snakes, lashing out to pull the men into the earth. I lunged forward, my blade a blur. I wasn't fighting for a throne anymore. I was fighting for her. I was fighting for the life she had given back to me. Soon after, I heard her cry out, a sharp melodic sound that sent a jolt of power through my veins. A group of mages had surrounded her, casting spells that burned with a cold, pale fire. I roared, the sound ripping from my throat like a thunderclap. My beast rose, not to take control, but to lend me its strength. I was a man of steel and fury. I was a king of claws and command. I was a force of nature. I cut through the front line, my strikes precise, brutal, and fast. Because I was a lichen, I could smell their fear. It tasted like ash in the back of my throat. They were terrified of what they had unleashed. They thought they were hunting a broken man. They were wrong. I saw Maris raise her hands. The earth split. The trees bent. She was tearing their defenses apart with a flick of her wrist. We were a symphony of violence, a dance of death. I moved to her side, blocking a heavy strike that would have taken her life. In the span of a breath, I spun, my sword finding the throat of the attacker. The body hit the dirt with a thud. We stood back to back, a circle of carnage growing around us. The Order was retreating, their ranks broken and their spirits shattered. They hadn't expected the forest to fight back. They hadn't expected the king to bleed for a girl. But they were losing, and they knew it. The tide had turned. That's why I felt the rush of victory. I looked at Maris, her face smeared with dirt and blood, her eyes blazing with a fierce, wild light. She was beautiful. She was lethal. She was mine. We were not going to stop until every last one of them was gone. The forest was our home, and it was time to clear out the vermin. I raised my sword, pointing it toward the dark canopy. They will never touch us again, I promised. The forest roared in agreement. the wind whipping our hair as we stood as the masters of our domain. Chapter 15. The Price of Survival. The aftermath was silent. The forest had swallowed the bodies, leaving only the scent of pine and fresh earth. Truth be told, I knew this wasn't the end. The order was a cancer, and we had only cut away the surface growth. We were still standing in the middle of a war. I looked at my hands. They were covered in blood. It wasn't the blood of a victim, though. It was the blood of the men who had tried to take my future. I felt no guilt. Moments later, Maris walked over to me. She moved with a grace that was no longer just human. She touched the wound on my arm, and the skin knit itself shut without a scar. Her power was growing. Because they were desperate, they chose to burn the forest to get to us. I saw a thin, black line of smoke rising on the horizon. They were setting the edges of the woods on fire. They were going to burn the world to kill us. As the sky darkened with ash, I realized the cost of our freedom. The forest was our protection, our source of power, and our home. If they burned it, we would lose everything. I looked at her. Her eyes were sad but focused. She knew what this meant. We had to leave. We had to go to the heart of their power and end it ourselves. It was a suicide mission. It was a fool's errand. It was the only choice we had. That's why I felt a strange calm. I took her hand, and we started walking toward the fire. We weren't running away. We were running toward the enemy. I didn't know if we would survive the next night, but I knew I would die fighting by her side. I had spent my life as a king of stone, but she had taught me how to be a man of heart. I would give my life to ensure she had a future. Just like that, the path opened up before us. The forest was clearing the way, guiding us toward the edge of the woods and the heart of the Order's keep. We were the fire and the beast. We were the end of their world. I drew my sword, the metal humming with the energy of the woods. Maris took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto the flames in the distance. We were ready for the final act. We were ready to burn their empire to the ground. Chapter 16. The Dying Breath. As the smoke choked the sky, the world turned into a nightmare of orange and black. The wall of flame roared like a starving god, consuming everything in its path. Because the fire devoured the trees, the air turned to thick gray ash that burned our lungs. I gripped Maris's hand, but her skin was turning to ice. As the fire licked the edges of the grove, the connection between her and the forest shattered with a sound like a glass heart breaking inside my own chest. She gasped, falling to her knees, her eyes losing their golden glow. The Order's fire was not natural. It was cursed. It was eating the very magic that gave her strength. Still, we had to move, but our feet felt like lead as the heat pressed in. What followed was a crushing sense of defeat that draped over me like a funeral shroud. Chapter 17. The Cave of Echoes. Meanwhile, the Order's elite forces closed in, their silver shields dampening the little magic we had left. Because the forest was dying, the path back to the castle was gone. I dragged Maris into a shallow limestone cave near the cliffside, my own strength failing as the old poison crawled back into my veins. Truth be told, I was terrified. Because the Order knew our scent, there was nowhere left to hide from their iron blades. She looked at me, her eyes empty and dark, and I realized I had led her into a tomb. We were alone. We were dying, and we were lost in the dark. Despite that, I refused to let go of her hand. That's why I felt the urge to scream at the uncaring stars above. Chapter 18. The Dark Night of the Soul. In the quiet that followed, the crackle of the burning wood sounded like the clicking of an assassin's teeth. That's why the darkness felt so final. I sat against the cold stone, holding her trembling hand, listening to the death of the world outside. I was a king who had lost his kingdom. I was a beast who had lost his prey. I was a man who had lost his heart. Because I was the one who had brought her here, the guilt was a heavy chain around my neck. Because the light in her eyes was fading, I knew the end was near. The goal seemed impossible now, and the hope was just a flicker in the void. What was the point of surviving if the world left to us was a pile of ash? Maybe it was time to let the fire take us both. As the walls closed in, I wondered if this was the last memory she would have of me. Chapter 19. The Embers of Hope. In the quiet that followed, the cave felt like a tomb. I stared at the ceiling, my chest burning, my breath coming in shallow rasps. Maris lay beside me, her skin cold, her pulse barely a whisper. I was ready to give up. I was a king of nothing, a protector of nobody. Because the fire was stripping the life from the very air, I knew we were hours away from the end. But then, I felt it. A thrumming in the stone beneath my back. It wasn't the fire. It was the earth. It was deep, slow, and ancient. It was calling to the wolf inside me. I placed my hand over Maris's heart. It beat once, then twice, then 3 times. Before the words left her lips, her eyes snapped open. They weren't empty anymore. They were glowing with the color of deep forest moss. She looked at me, and I felt the hum of the forest flood into my own veins. It was like drinking liquid starlight. Because she was the daughter of the earth, she had pulled the magic out of the scorched ground, deep down where the roots still breathed. She sat up, her movements fluid and strong. "The forest isn't dead," she whispered, her voice like wind through the pines. "It's just sleeping, Lucian. It's waiting for us." I felt the silver poison in my blood melt away, replaced by a surge of raw, wild power. We were the fire. We were the storm. We were the end. Still, the fire outside was raging. The heat was immense. We had to move. I stood up, my legs steady, my mind clear. The beast inside me wasn't fighting for control. It was ready to guard her. I looked at Maris, and I saw the queen she was born to be. She reached out, taking my hand, and the stone cave wall shimmered, turning into a portal of tangled vines. "Are you ready to see what a king and a queen can do when the world tries to burn them down?" We were about to show them. As we stepped through the vines, the heat of the forest didn't burn us. It bowed to us. Chapter 20. The Shift in the Wind. Truth be told, the plan was madness. We had to channel the fire, not fight it. Instead of running from the flames, we would become them. We walked through the wall of heat, the forest parting for us like a sea. Because the fire was actually a barrier designed by the Order to hold the forest magic inside, we could use it to break their own gates. Maris raised her hands, and the flames didn't hurt us. They swirled around our fingers like loyal pets. We were not just survivors anymore. We were the storm. What followed was the realization that our roles had changed. I was the blade, and she was the map. I watched her focus, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She wasn't just controlling the fire, she was speaking to it. I felt a surge of pride so deep it hurt. I was her king, I was her guard, I was her heart. We walked through the ash-covered remains of the grove, the ground black and silent under our feet. Everything was gone, yet everything was beginning. Because we had to be fast, we moved in a blur of motion. The Order's castle loomed in the distance, a dark tower of stone sitting in the middle of the scorched plains. It looked untouchable, a monument to their pride. But pride is a weakness. We were going to strike them where they felt safest. In that moment, I felt the beast stir, not with rage, but with a cold, hunting precision. "Are you ready for the final hunt?" I looked at Maris, and her eyes met mine with a promise of justice. We walked toward the gate, not as broken runaways, but as the nightmare they had tried to build. We were the end of their era. Chapter 21. The March of Kings. By the time we reached the perimeter of the Order's keep, the sky was pitch black with ash. The air was thick, heavy, and tasted of sulfur. Still, we pushed forward. I was a man on a mission, to save the forest, to save her, to save myself. Maris walked at my side, her presence a steady, grounding force that kept my wolf from taking over. We were the fire, we were the storm, we were the end. I could see the guards on the walls, their silver armor glinting in the firelight. They were nervous, pacing, looking out into the darkness of the woods they thought they had conquered. They didn't see us coming. Because they thought we were weak, they didn't have their defenses raised against the earth itself. I motioned to Maris and she smiled, a sharp, hungry look. I drew my sword, the steel singing as it caught the light of the burning horizon. I felt the pulse of the earth in my boots, strong and ready to rise. I looked at the gate, then at the sky, then at the woman who had brought me back to life. I felt no fear. I felt only a cold, hard resolution. As the wind shifted, it carried our scent straight to them. One of the guards turned, his eyes widening. He opened his mouth to scream, but the earth beneath his feet gave way, trapping him in the soil. It was time. I didn't wait for them to sound the alarm. I charged, my feet pounding against the ash, my heart screaming for justice. Maris ran beside me, the fire in her hands growing into a roaring golden mane. We were not just two people anymore. We were the fury of the woods, and we had come to collect our due. As the castle gates loomed ahead, I wondered, would they ever realize they were already dead? Chapter 21, The March of Kings. By the time we reached the perimeter of the Order's keep, the sky was pitch black with ash. The air was thick, heavy, and tasted of sulfur. Still, we pushed forward. I was a man on a mission, to save the forest, to save her, to save myself. Maris walked at my side, her presence a steady grounding force that kept my wolf from taking over. We were the fire. We were the storm. We were the end. I could see the guards on the walls, their silver armor glinting in the firelight. They were nervous, pacing, looking out into the darkness of the woods they thought they had conquered. They didn't see us coming. Because they thought we were weak, they didn't have their defenses raised against the earth itself. I motioned to Maris and she smiled, a sharp, hungry look. I drew my sword, the steel singing as it caught the light of the burning horizon. I felt the pulse of the earth in my boots, strong and ready to rise. I looked at the gate, then at the sky, then at the woman who had brought me back to life. I felt no fear. I felt only a cold, hard resolution. As the wind shifted, it carried our scent straight to them. One of the guards turned, his eyes widening. He opened his mouth to scream, but the earth beneath his feet gave way, trapping him in the soil. It was time. I didn't wait for them to sound the alarm. I charged, my feet pounding against the ash, my heart screaming for justice. Maris ran beside me, the fire in her hands growing into a roaring golden mane. We were not just two people anymore. We were the fury of the woods, and we had come to collect our due. As the castle gates loomed ahead, I wondered, would they ever realize they were already dead? Chapter 22, The Final Confrontation. The gates of the keep groaned, then exploded inward. Wood shattered like dry twigs. Because we were the storm, the guards didn't stand a chance. I surged forward, my blade a streak of silver in the dark. Maris was right behind me, her hands glowing with a bright golden fire. Just like that, we were in the courtyard. The Order's leader stood on the steps, his eyes wide with fear. He clutched a staff made of twisted iron. Without warning, he slammed the staff into the ground. A wave of dark energy rushed toward us. I didn't slow down. I roared, the sound shaking the stone walls. My beast clawed at the air, hungry for justice. In that moment, the ground beneath the leader cracked. Maris raised her hands, and vines ripped through the stone floors. They grabbed the guards, pulling them down into the earth. It was chaotic. It was loud. It was the end. The leader shrieked a spell of death, a beam of black light shooting at Maris's heart. I didn't think. I leaped in front of her. The black light hit my chest, but instead of killing me, it shattered against my skin. Because the forest was protecting us, the energy dissolved into nothing. As the tension broke, I charged. I closed the distance between us in a heartbeat. The leader swung his staff, but I was faster. I swiped, my claw catching his armor, sending him tumbling down the stone steps. He crawled away, desperate to reach his weapon. I stood over him, my eyes burning with a golden light. I was the king of the beasts, and I was done with his lies. When her name left his lips in a plea for mercy, I didn't stop. Maris stepped forward, her hand glowing with the power of the entire forest. She didn't strike him with rage, she struck him with the truth. The golden fire engulfed the leader, and his dark magic turned to ash. In the span of a breath, he was gone. The keep fell silent. The order was broken. I looked at Maris, and I saw the strength of a queen. We had won. The war was over. The forest was free. As the echoes of the fight died away, I fell to my knees, the weight of the crown finally sliding off my shoulders. I was alive, and I was free. Chapter 23. The Silent Ruins. The silence that followed the battle was heavy, but it felt good. In the quiet that followed, I breathed in the air. It tasted like ash, but for the first time, it didn't burn. The poison was completely gone from my body. I walked over to the stone steps and sat down, my legs trembling with exhaustion. Maris came to me, her golden light fading to a soft, gentle shimmer. She was tired too. Her hair was messy, and her face was covered in dust, but she looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. As the echo faded, the castle walls began to crumble. The order had built this place on lies, and now it was falling apart. We were safe. I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her neck. She smelled of rain and wildflowers, the scent of the forest that we had saved. With every heartbeat, I felt her calm, steady presence. She was my anchor. She was the reason I had fought so hard to stay human. In the stillness that followed, I kissed her. It was a slow, deep kiss that tasted of victory and new beginnings. We had been through a nightmare, but we had woken up together. I opened my eyes and looked at the ruin of the keep. The order was no more. Their greed, their hate, and their silver were buried under the rubble. We were alone in the wreckage, but it felt like a paradise. Because we had survived, we had a future. I looked at my hands. They were strong, steady, and free of the silver stains. The beast inside me purred, a soft, vibrating sound of contentment. It wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my brother. We were a team. I held Maris tighter, watching the sun begin to peek over the horizon. The light was golden, warming the cold stone. We had done it. We had broken the cycle. The nightmare was over, and the morning had finally come. I realized that my life had never truly begun until the moment I met her in the dark halls of Ethelgard. Chapter 24. The New Beginning. Come morning, the forest had already started to heal. Green shoots pushed through the cracks in the stone. Little flowers began to bloom in the places where blood had been spilled. It was a miracle. With a single glance, Maris took my hand. We walked out of the ruined keep and into the heart of the woods. The trees were vibrant, their leaves rustling in a happy, humming song. I felt the pulse of the forest in my own chest, a steady, rhythmic beat that matched hers. Truth be told, we had a lot of work to do. We had to rebuild the kingdom. We had to teach the people that beasts were not monsters. But we had time. We had each other. As the wind shifted, it carried the scent of life, growth, and love. I stopped and looked at her. Her eyes were bright, clear, and full of peace. I didn't need to be a king anymore. I didn't need to be a hunter. I just needed to be with her. Between one breath and the next, I knew this was home. I was no longer a king of shadows or a monster of the night. I was a man who had found his mate. I was a man who had found his purpose. The forest hummed around us, a song of gratitude. The trees reached out, their branches forming a canopy over our heads. We sat on the soft grass, watching the world wake up. That's why I finally smiled. A real, honest smile. I looked at my hands, then at her, and I knew I would spend the rest of my life making sure she was happy. The beast slept peacefully in the back of my mind. We were safe. We were together. We were home. I leaned back, looking up at the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The long, cold winter of my life had finally melted away. I reached for her and she leaned into me, her head on my shoulder. Everything was perfect. This was the start of our story, the beginning of a life built on trust, love, and the wild, beating heart of the forest. I finally knew what it meant to be alive. I was hers, and she was mine, and together, we were eternal. The end.